No, no buzz. Just Bees Book Club. Feels like it's been like 6 months since I read this book. It has not. It has been less. It feels like it. On my little recommendations kick, I read Unboxing by Joyce Carol Oates. Second Oates of the year, and a much better one than the other one I read. Um, Unboxing is specifically the expanded edition, as you can see in the little corner there, with some photographs by John Renard. It has a foreword, and then it has the essay on boxing, which is sort of a big meditation on boxing by Oates. Originally published, let's see, I actually don't remember it. I don't know that I looked at this. Originally published in 1987 as On Boxing by Dolphin / Doubleday. So I guess it was a short book. It's followed by On Mike Tyson, originally published in 88 in Parenthetical Woman and Parenthetical Writer, Occasions and Opportunities by E.P. Dutton and Company. I've never even heard of them. And then there's a little essay called The Cruelest Sport that was originally in the New York Review of Books in 1992. Portions of Unboxing have appeared in earlier versions of the New York Times Magazine in June 1985 and the Ontario Review in fall-winter 1986. So, yeah, big essay that was sort of conglomerated out of a couple of earlier essays in the late 80s, and then another one specifically a big profile of Mike Tyson. I'm mostly going to focus on the Unboxing one, because this feels like it's been such a long time. I went through and just sort of skimmed it and pulled some quotes. I think at the very high level, I enjoyed this. I was kind of surprised by how much I enjoyed Unboxing. I think, as I said in the last video, I know that Oates is a good writer. I think the Fall of Life on Earth or whatever was a poorly written book. That's not an impossible thing for a good writer to do. It feels very new journalism-y. There's heavy reference to Norman Mailer's work, of course. I say of course as though I've read any of it. I haven't. But it's like a sort of broad, like learned but not super erudite take. It sort of assumes some amount of knowledge, but is also pretty accessible. I think. There's like a lot of references to Nietzsche, and who else comes up off the top of my head? I think Freud's in there like once. Spinoza pops up. Mailer, of course, a handful of boxing writers, the magazine The Ring. There's like a bunch of broad reference that happen, usually just like in terms of a quote, so not really like sustained analysis of anyone, just sort of like using certain ideas, which is not a good or a bad thing necessarily, I don't think, and I think it is deployed well here in terms of being an accessible text about a sport that I personally know nothing about. Well, one of the main arguments of this book is that boxing is not in fact a sport. It is, and that largely hinges on Oates claiming that sports involve play and boxing does not involve play. You do not play boxing, as she says. It's not a value judgment that she's saying, like it's diminished beneath sport. It is in fact, in some sense, the only sporting like event that she seems to care about at all, and it is compared to sport, but not sport. In sort of one of the broad arguments of the book. I think broadly the arguments are: boxing is fascinating. It is itself and not anything else. It is deeply entwined with especially race and masculinity in America and Britain, and that there's also a distinctive class element to it that she sort of teases out. I think the biggest thing that I found, the thing that I assumed was going to be the stumbling block for me was those sorts of arguments, and I think nothing hit me as like, shut the fuck up, I never hit that moment. So that was like that sort of got me over the hump to the point where I could just sort of like read and just learn stuff about Muhammad Ali and who was that guy? There's like one person who she mentions just offhandedly near the end, like his name was like Don Jones or something like that. Who's like who she says is the only avowed murderer in boxing, despite people having died in the ring. She makes a very strong point. This is that there's no murder in boxing. That that the sort of laws are suspended in that sense. But there's a guy who apparently was a boxer who explicitly talked about being like a hitman in the Dominican Republic, just like I'm assuming just a fascist guerrilla, like explicitly, and who like says he killed a guy when he was 14 and went to juvie for it, and he was just like allowed to be a boxer, I guess, for a while. But there's like a very broad history of boxing. It starts. I mean, it goes all the way back to the gladiators. Because of course, it fucking does. But this is another thing that I think that Oates does pretty well in this. Like, she goes back to the gladiators and gives the big blood sport thing, and then she's like, that's actually not related to boxing at all. It's conceptually whatever, but like boxing starts in Great Britain in the 17th century. With prize fights, and sort of develops from there, and she gives like the actual history after giving the sort of like mythic history, I guess. I could have done without the mythic history portion. I just think that is uninteresting, but to each their own, I guess. And I wasn't writing in '85. I wasn't even born yet, barely. So yeah, I'm gonna pull a couple quotes and just sort of like talk about the other sort of broad themes that I think come out of them. So we're gonna start on page 4. Nor can I think of boxing in writerly terms as a metaphor for something else. No one whose interest began as mine did in childhood, as an offshoot of my father's interests, is likely to think of boxing as a symbol of something beyond itself, as if its uniqueness were merely an abbreviation or iconographic, though it can entertain the proposition that life is a metaphor for boxing. For one of those bouts that go on, round following round, jabs, missed punches, clinches, nothing determined, again the bell, and again you and your opponent so evenly matched, it's impossible not to see that your opponent is you, and why the struggle on an elevated platform enclosed by ropes as in a pen beneath hot, crude, pitiless lights in the presence of an impatient crowd, that sort of hellish writerly metaphor. Life is like boxing in many unsettling respects. But boxing is only like boxing. For if you've seen 500 boxing matches, you have seen 500 boxing matches, and their common denominator, which certainly exists, is not of primary interest to you. If the host is only a symbol, as the Catholic writer Flannery O'Connor once remarked, I'd say the hell with it. Yeah, and this is sort of like the opening big thesis statement, that boxing is simply boxing, that this is not going to be a big essay sort of teasing out the ways in which boxing is a metaphor for life. And explicitly, it turns that around and says life could be a metaphor for boxing, which is just like, I don't know, I love that shit. I grew up, really came into my own reading Derrida. That deconstructive turn, the upsetting of binaries that he does is, I think, sort of evident here. Derrida says, in culture, the spoken word is primary. It's assumed primary over the written. What if we assumed the written word to be primary? What if we assume that we wrote before we spoke? And he has a big old argument about it that I haven't read in 15 years or whatever, so I'm not going to get into it. But just that rhetorical move, I was going to say that rhetorical move works for me, but that's not true. That rhetorical move grabs me because I have many, many times seen it done poorly. I have myself done it very, very poorly in the past. But it's an immediate attention grabber, so I'm more closely reading when somebody does something like that, and I think Oates throughout this book, especially on boxing, on Mike Tyson, is a little less interested in that, although it does end up sort of retreading a ton of the stuff that was on boxing. Yeah, she bears out that move, I think, throughout the unboxing, which I think was a huge thing for me because I like it when it's done well, and I think it was done quite well. I don't really need to unpack the rest of that. We're gonna hop over to page 15. My notes are not. Oh yeah. Let's see. That where? Where the hell are they starting this? I can see the end, but oh, there it is. Okay, I got it. When a boxer is knocked out, it does not mean, as it's commonly thought, that he has been knocked unconscious or even incapacitated. It means, rather more poetically, that he has been knocked out of time, with a capital T. End sentence parenthetical. The referee's dramatic count of 10 constitutes a metaphysical parenthesis, of a kind through which the fallen boxer must penetrate if he hopes to continue in time. Capital T again. I just love that shit. This is another thing that's just like little catnipy to me, right? To make a very salient, if easily misunderstood point, knocked out, or a knockout does not mean one is knocked out. One can be knocked out for less than 10 seconds, and in which case you get knocked out and you struggle back up. There's much discussion across this book of being knocked out on one's feet, of fighters who were functionally unconscious on their feet, fighting for multiple rounds, at least, sort of allegedly. There is a technical terminology happening with the term knockout, in the same way that, there's also the term technical knockout, right, that you don't necessarily get into. I don't know when that was introduced, but I'm assuming it was way before. I mean, it has to be not long after the introduction of the referee, or well, we'll get to that with my next quote. That it is literally like a metaphysical concept in some ways, right? The time itself is the factor in which one can be knocked out, rather than functioning brain activity, or exhibitions of signs of consciousness, because one can be, like I said, unconscious and exhibiting the signs of conscious. One can be conscious but knocked out because that 10 count happened. And I just love that little parenthetical. The referee's dramatic count of 10 constitutes a metaphysical parenthesis of a kind through which the fallen boxer must penetrate if he hopes to continue in time. That is, you are enclosed from the start of the count to the end of the count. The only way to continue the fight, to not be knocked out, is not to be not knocked out. It's to be able to get up, to break free of that parenthetical, or to cause an ellipsis, let's say, until the next time the parenthetical can begin, which is to say the next time the fighter is knocked down and the referee begins the 10 count. Yeah. Fun stuff. Let's see. 47. Let's see if I can't find this one a little faster, because I think I've said pretty much everything I want to say here. Yes. Speaking of referees. The referees are intermediary in the fight. He is our moral conscience extracted from us as spectators, so that, for the duration of the fight, conscience need not be a factor in our experience, nor need it be a factor in the boxer's behavior. Yeah, that's all I pulled. There's a bunch more stuff around this that is really interesting. Yeah, is this the... maybe I want to read a little bit more, because that was just what I pulled last night when I was editing, or skimming. Let's do a long one, actually. So England's earliest bare knuckle champion. Hold on. Let me talk about that really quick. I really like that move, and I think that's actually exactly correct. The referee acts as the conscience, so that the crowd does not have to have a conscience. Is a fascinating claim that I think is a correct claim. This is why. There's one reason. This is a structural reason. Let's say why a crowd at a boxing match can feel absolute bloodlust, because there is an escape valve, which is the referee can stop the fight. And you can get mad at the referee for stopping the fight. Some people even throw something at a referee stopping a fight. But structurally speaking, the crowd can get as vicious as it wants to, because there is somebody there who is invested with the structural capacity to end the thing before it becomes too much. She talks earlier about like very early prize fighting stuff where there were no referees, where it was just, you know, traveling carnival. Guy goes, I can beat anyone in this crowd. You can throw your hat in if you want to get in. Just people form a circle. The people there had to be the referees on some level, right? And so they couldn't have gotten to the point where they were just like, kill the guy. And if they did, is a fundamentally different thing. That would be a murder and not accidental death in a boxing ring, right? And so I want to now I want to situate this in the context that I was coming with, because yeah, the referee fully is the conscience. England's earliest bare knuckle champion was a man named James Figg, who won the honor in 1719. The last of the bare knuckle champions was the American heavyweight John L. Sullivan, whose career from approximately 1882 to 1892 overlapped both bare knuckle fighting and gloved boxing as established under the rules of the Marquis of Queensberry, which are observed with some elaboration to the present time. The most significant changes were two: the introduction of leather leather gloves, parenthetically, mainly to protect the hand, not the face. A man's knuckles are easily broken, end parenthetical. And the third man in the ring, the referee, whose privilege it is to stop the fight at his own discretion if he thinks a boxer has no chance of winning or cannot defend himself against his opponent. With the introduction of the referee, the crudeness of the noble art passes over into the relative sophistication of boxing. The third man in the ring, usually anonymous so far as the crowd is concerned, appears to many observers no more than an observer himself, even an intruder. A ghostly presence as fluid in motion and quick-footed as the boxers themselves. Indeed, he is frequently an ex-boxer. But so central to the drama of boxing is the referee that the spectacle of two men fighting each other unsupervised in an elevated ring would seem hellish, if not obscene. Life rather than art. The referee makes boxing possible, and then we have our quote. The referee is our intermediary in the fight. He is our moral conscience extracted from us as spectators, so that for the duration of the fight, conscience need not be a factor in our experience, nor need it be a factor in the boxer's behavior. Yeah, I'm again also a bit of a sucker for that sort of move. I mean, it's the same move in some ways, right? It's for finding the thing that is overlooked or that is devalued, and saying, what if we prioritize that? What if we made that the primary concern? What new thing could we see about this object that we are observing? And when the answer is good, the answer is good, you know? It's a useful tool to have in your toolkit. Yeah. And then I guess sort of just to say a final thing is like, there's a pretty good amount of disparagement of professional wrestling in this book, which I find funny, given boxing and professional wrestling's like deep intertwined history. But it's the 80s, you know, it's rock and wrestling connection, it's whatever. I get it, I guess. People, especially in combat sports, have very strong feelings about wrestling. But I think one of the reasons that I was able to get into this book is because I've never been like a fan of wrestling. I don't try to be a fan of much, honestly. I try not to be a fan, as a matter of fact. But I've had an interest in pro wrestling as on and off for a long time, that involved at one point, when I was trying to be a freelancer, the pitch I was developing involved like trying to truly understand the finances of professional wrestling, and specifically the World Wrestling Entertainment Corporation. And so I read a lot of books about pro wrestling, or about the history, about its development, about where the money comes from, that historically, so as to situate that. That nothing came of that pitch. I never even pitched it, I don't think. I think I just burned out at some point. And having that knowledge, I think, helped me understand some of the more spectacular elements of unboxing. I think it sort of anchored me in terms of understanding the feeling of maybe not the life aspect of it, but the performance aspect of boxing. And then also, just like I said, I learned some stuff about Muhammad Ali that I didn't know, and that was fun. He seems cool. Yeah, unboxing. It's my first unboxing video. Thanks for not watching.